Welcome to the Committee on Education. I feel like it's important that we start on time, and it's 1 o'clock. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Buck? Senator Doñate? Senator Flores? Senator Hammond? Senator Neal? Senator Titus? Chair Lang?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please mark Senator Buck excused, and as she returns, mark her present. Okay, welcome to our audience today. Let's just go through a couple of housekeeping things. We'll do these at the beginning of every meeting, and if you come every time, it's going to kind of get monotonous, but I feel like we have to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if you have electronic devices, please silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table at the door and provide a business card to our committee secretary, Louise. And when you're testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and affiliation, if any, for the record, and turn the microphone off each time you are finished speaking. And then when if you're asked a question, please restate your name for the record. Presenters have provided 10 copies for members of the public and submitted their presentations electronically to our committee manager, Louise, by 1 o'clock yesterday. Anyone can view these materials on Nellis. We will take public comment at the end of the meeting, and please note that I reserve the right to limit the length of public comment. You may submit your full comments in writing and then briefly summarize them in your spoken testimony. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents. It's not a sign of disrespect or inattention. With that on the agenda, we're just going to change our the order in which we're doing things. We're going to have a presentation first from Guy Hobbs, Commission on School Funding, Megan Peterson, Deputy Secretary of Student Investment and Nevada's Department of Education, and James Kirkpatrick, State Education Funding Manager with the Nevada Department of Education. Please try and keep your presentation to 20 minutes. So that we have enough time to do all of our business of the day. And when you're ready, we're ready for you to begin. And I think Mr. Hobbs is in Vegas, then we'll be on the camera.
Good morning. Guy Hobbs representing the Commission on School Funding. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Just to give you a little bit of background about the Commission, I know some of you are very familiar with the work of the Commission. It was created by legislative act in the 2019 session by way of Senate Bill 543. Additional tasks were assigned to the Commission by way of AB 495 in the 21 session, and essentially over the last 3.5 years or so, the Commission has been focusing on two primary tasks. The first one that involved the first 2 years of work from the Commission, on behalf of the Commission, involved the pupil-centered funding plan, going through the pupil-centered funding plan, addressing some of the details involved in the calculations that apportion the money between and among school districts in the state. Several of the tasks that were given to the Commission were assigned to the Commission by way of legislative memorandum. I'll cover some of those a bit later in the presentation, but suffice it to say that our time, the first 2 years, was primarily focused on fine-tuning the pupil-centered funding plan, which is now a part of Nevada law. The second task given to the Commission was to identify optimal funding for education. And in identifying optimal funding for education, also provide methods of funding that could be utilized to reach the target levels of funding over a 10-year period. And all of that, again, was defined by Senate Bill 543. For the second part of the work, particularly the identification of funding targets, and that's what I'm going to review with you today, we spent a considerable amount of time looking for ways to define optimal funding. And we focused on, as you'll see, national averages, subject matter expert recommendations, and input from the various superintendents of schools throughout the state. As required by law, we filed a report with the state on November 14th of 2022. It's a fairly lengthy report. It focuses again on the identification of funding targets for education as well as methods of funding, which gets into a tremendous amount of detail. So that report was filed. I apologize for anybody that's picked up a copy of the report and noted its thickness. I believe with the appendices attached to it, it clocked in at some 400 pages or so, but the main part of the report was approximately 50 pages. And because of the detailed level of that report, subsequent to the filing of the report with the state, we also prepared an executive summary that should have been provided to you previously. So what I'm going to go through with you today is the identification of the funding targets. In the report that we filed, and the slide that hopefully is available for you to see up there, are you able to see that?
Not quite yet.
I believe Megan Peterson is probably trying to bring it up north.
We're having technical issues right now, so if you want to go ahead and get started, the people on the dais, I believe, have a copy of your oh, it's up now. Go ahead.
Okay, let's go to the first slide, Megan. And I'll try to move through this as quickly as possible in light of the time constraints you noted. The first slide that you see in the report, we again looked at Nevada's per pupil spending. That's the top bar that you see, and this was for the most recent information available at the time we put the report together, which was the year 2020. Nevada was spending $9,548 per pupil. The national average from the same source from which the Nevada data was pulled shows an average national expenditure of $13,489 per pupil. And the subject matter expert, APA in parentheses, which stands for Augenblick, Palick and Associates, a consultant that the state has used a number of times previously as a subject matter expert on education spending, indicated that the amount per pupil should be $14,337. And of course, the differences between those numbers multiplied times enrollment each year determines the dollar difference between what is currently being spent, what should be spent to achieve the national average, or better yet, what should be spent to achieve the subject matter expert's recommendation. Now, again, this was 2020 data. So on the next slide, we have another comparison. We have substituted down below, you'll see that the bottom part of it is noted now 2024 with an E, which means estimated, as that year hasn't occurred yet, but updating the Nevada spending for what was in the budget, in the state budget in 2023, raised the amount of per pupil spending on Nevada's part to $9,717. We inflated the national average and subject matter expert numbers forward to $2024, and you can see the comparisons are still relatively similar to what you saw up above. Next slide. We then took the amount that we had in our report in 2020 and inflated that forward to 2024. And that level of spending from a Nevada perspective would have been, according to the inflated values of what was spent in 2020, should have looked something like $10,974 compared to $15,500 for the national average, or nearly $16,500 to reach the subject matter experts' recommended level. Next slide. And this brings us up to more current information with the filing of the executive budget and taking the numbers that are in the executive budget and reducing those back to per pupil spending. You can see that Nevada's number is at 11,785, again compared to 15,503 to achieve the national average, or nearly 16,500 to achieve the subject matter experts level of growth. And that difference between 11,785 and the amount spent in the prior year, which was 9,717, that's roughly a $2,000 difference per pupil in the amount appropriated in the executive budget versus what was spent in the prior year. From a total dollar perspective, that would appear to be just under $1 billion for the first fiscal year of the next biennium and a bit over $1 billion for the second year of the biennium. Going to the next slide. And this takes us again back to our report. These are numbers that we included in the report. The 10,974 is the amount that from the 2020 number was extended forward by inflation to 2024. And then if you use just a normal average inflationary growth rate through 2033, you could see that the report anticipated that barring any other actions other than funding at an inflationary level, the number would have risen to $13,115 in 2033. And let me remind you again, the reason why we're showing a 10-year period here refers back to the legislative direction that we had to provide funding targets and methods of funding over a 10-year period. So everything that you will see from us is over a 10-year period. The next slide compares those projections in the dark blue bar to what was actually incorporated into the executive budget. So for 24 and 25, those are known values. For 26 and beyond, we took the amounts that were known for 24 and 25 and just did a simple inflation at the average annual inflation rate over the past 20 or so years to be able to compare the lighter bars to the darker bars. And you can see that the funding commitment in the upcoming biennium by way of the executive budget does put us in a more favorable position than what we anticipated when we initially put the report together. The next slide, I think, offers an important view as well. On the left side, these are the values that were included in our report. And again, let's remember that when we filed the report, we didn't have the advantage of either knowing what the Economic Forum's revenue estimates would be for the next biennium, nor could we anticipate what the executive budget would include. But the difference in the colors in the bars on the left, the lighter part of it represents the amount of funding that would be needed in addition to the amount that was assumed that would be available if it was just funded at a normal rate of inflation per year. So the light blue part represented the quote-unquote unfunded part of it on a going forward basis. Shifting over to the right side, with the higher appropriations for the state education fund in the first 2 years, 24, 25, you could see that the bars are completely dark solid. And beyond that, the amount of the light blue part is reduced on a going forward basis. And certainly that's good news to know that we're in a position where the first 2 years of the 10-year funding plan would appear to have been met through the filing of the executive budget. The next chart, and again, I know I'm going through these rapidly, but I'm certainly trying to be mindful of your time constraints. The left part of this, from the Commission on School Funding report, based on the information we had available at that time, and I'm going to focus on the 2033 values. noted that within 10 years, an additional $2.8 billion would need to be appropriated on behalf of education to achieve the target funding values. Now shifting over to the right side, with the advent of the funding that is included in the executive budget, you could see that it's 24 and 25 have been reduced to essentially zero because of the sufficiency of those appropriations. And in every subsequent year, the numbers have come down, and from 2.8 to 2.1 billion in 2033. Next slide. This is a similar type of comparison, but focusing on the amounts that were identified by APA. And as you would imagine, since their per pupil amount was larger, the deltas or the differences between anticipated funding without additional intervention and the target funding levels would have been higher every year, both incrementally and on an aggregate basis. Comparing that to the governor's budget that's been filed, on the right side, you could see again those light blue areas, which represents the additional funding challenges have been diminished. Now, in saying that they've been diminished, that in no stretch means to suggest that those still are not formidable values. When you're talking about this amount of money on a per student basis times the overall enrollment, the amount of additional funding that will be needed over years 3 through 10 of the 10-year funding period are still quite significant. Next chart. In our original report, we identified aggregate funding by 2033 of an additional $3.4 billion per year to achieve the APA funding levels. Again, on the right side, because of the appropriations that have already been included in the executive budget, that amount has been reduced by $800 million. And at this point, I will go ahead and pause to see if there are any questions about the findings of the commission with respect to the funding targets.
Committee members, do you have any questions? And please feel free to go, Mr. Hobbs, feel free to go direct to the member.
Thank you.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the graphs, even though they're kind of shaded blue and a little difficult sometimes to sort out. They all kind of mesh together. My question revolves around the numbers that you use for this funding. It looks like you just used the direct Nevada General Fund or the Nevada mining monies, all of the funding that we use in Nevada for these numbers. Are you looking, did you add, and I'm sorry if you said it initially, perhaps any marijuana monies transferred or any other source of revenues to schools?
Thank you very much for the question. And I do sincerely apologize for taking what probably is a 45-minute presentation and trying to capsulize it down to the time period that you all have today. I rushed through quite a bit there. When we're comparing the Nevada spending to the national average to APA, we are truly comparing apples to apples, number one. I think in past years, you all have seen a variety of numbers, and sometimes it included things like capital outlay. Sometimes it included things like federal funds. Sometimes you were comparing apples and oranges, and in all of these cases, the same funds are compared, and the same expenditures are compared. In other words, none of the numbers include federal funding. None of them include capital. So they're clean in that regard. And to your point about whether it includes things like mining and room tax and cannabis and other sources of funding, because of the pupil-centered funding plan, all of the revenue sources, including the state's direct appropriation for education, now go into essentially one bucket at the top of the pupil-centered funding plan directly. In past years and prior to the pupil-centered funding plan, as you well know, they entered the equation at a number of different points in a number of different ways. they all now enter the equation at the top. And yes, it includes all of those revenue sources that are generated on behalf of education in the state.
So thank you for that. And if I might follow up, Madam Chair, on that question. So do you have comparisons on the overall, because this is, I've seen charts where the actual amount of monies that go per pupil from all sources are significantly different where Nevada lies on that when we look at federal funding and other sources. And I'm wondering if you have those and if you could send those to us too, where we fit in those charts of all sources of funding that go to education in the state of Nevada.
Certainly, Senator. The source of information that we used, and you know, again, this is extremely important because of the use of these numbers, that they be consistent. If I were in your position, I would largely be asking the same questions that you're asking, and I can give you some assurance that we asked ourselves the same questions along the way. Using NCES, and I believe that stands for National Center for Education Statistics, they compile these values a number of different ways, sometimes including federal funds, sometimes excluding federal funds, sometimes including capital, sometimes not, sometimes including private money. So number one item of importance for us was, let's make sure we're consistent about how we're doing this and we're not comparing one that includes federal funds to one that doesn't include federal funds. So we can check that particular box. Now, if you wanted to see with federal funds, Nevada's spending compared to the national average, NCES also produces those statistics. And I believe the folks from NDE, it would be rather simple for them to provide that to you, or I would certainly be happy through NDE to provide that to you.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang. I was wondering if special education discretionary unit funds are included in this from the state, not from federal.
Senator, in answering that question, I will certainly ask any of the folks from NDE who work with the more specific areas of expenditure to
I'm
correct
sorry,
me
Mr.
any place
Hobbs.
I may-
Could you identify yourself for the people that are on via phone so they know who's talking?
I am so sorry for making that rookie mistake. Guy Hobbs with the Commission for School Funding. Again, there may be detail about things like categoricals, whether it's special ed or at-risk or English language learners, that the Nevada Department of Education is much better positioned to answer. But in terms of the numbers that we have provided to you today, that would include all categories of spending for both base and categoricals.
All right, so I'll hold my question for the Department of Education. Okay. Another quick question, if I may, Chair. I just wondered what happens with the hold harmless districts like Humboldt, Eureka, Esmeralda, Story. Do we know?
Again, Guy Hobbs Commission on School Funding, and again would defer to NDE because they probably have a bit more detail. But from my understanding, the number of hold harmless districts that we had prior to the filing of the executive budget was much higher than those that we would have after the filing of the executive budget. And in fact, I believe that there will only be 3 districts as a consequence of the appropriations that will still be in a hold harmless position. I would be hard pressed to name those for you at the moment, but that's significantly lower than prior to the filing of the executive budget with the increased appropriations. You know, very frankly, the advent of additional funding does quite a bit to reduce the perceived harm or perceived or real harm that any of those districts that were in the hold harmless position may have had. So it was a positive development that the number of those that are under hold harmless would be reduced to a much, much smaller number.
Will someone be doing an analysis on that? Because I'm getting feedback from those superintendents that even with the $2,000 additional funding that potentially will come in, that they will be taking cuts, and then therefore they won't be able to give raises and do the various things for their districts. I just wanted that on the record.
Again, Guy Hobbs Commission on School Funding, not to commit to something on NDE's part, but I believe we could certainly provide you the information with respect to those districts that are still affected by the hold harmless and to what degree.
Any further questions from the committee? Okay, with that, we'll go to the Department of Education. Thank you, Mr. Hobbs.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having us today. My name is Megan Peterson for the record, and I serve as Deputy Superintendent for the Division of Student Investment. I am joined by James Kirkpatrick, our State Education Fund Manager. Hoping the presentation is presenting. Okay. Today we will be reviewing the mechanisms of the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan with you and both go over the fiscal and administrative implementation that we have done to date. As we go through the presentation, I'll provide a few analogies to help provide context and the framework with which to understand the model. And we will interweave some mechanisms, some of the mechanism conversations.
I'm sorry, Ms. Peterson, I'm getting a text that people can't hear you. So if you can move the microphone closer to your,
Is this better?
that's better. Thank
Okay.
you.
So as I was mentioning, we will go through the mechanisms of the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan as well as the fiscal and administrative implementation that we have used to date. And we'll interweave some of the mechanism conversation with implementation as it relates. Also, as we go through the presentation today, we'll be referring collectively to school districts, charter schools, and our university school for profoundly gifted pupils collectively as local education agencies and address the specific groups individually as applicable. So the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan, what is it? It was codified by the 2019 legislature and identifies a plan for allocating funding for K-12 education in the state. It identifies specific revenues intended to pay for public education that provides a base level of support for each pupil that is then adjusted at the district level to account for local variations in costs. What makes the model different from any other budget or model in the state is that this is a revenue-driven model. All of our other budgets are driven by expenditures. This means that when there's an increase in revenue, there's also a corresponding increase in funding available to our students. Under the Nevada plan, and like most other budgets in the state, funding is determined based on expenditures and caseload and merit increases only. So with the increases in revenues, this obviously gets the dollars out quicker to those who need it. I do want to point out that it's important to remember that because of the revenue connection, costs do not inform the output of the model, only revenues do. So there's not a direct correlation throughout. The Pupil-Centered Funding Plan combines multiple revenues, including local school support tax, property taxes, marijuana, and other revenues that total 20 different sources. These revenues are then distributed across 4 different tiers of funding within the model. It's important to note that the state allocates the funds to the school districts, but the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan specifically provides flexibility to school districts and LEAs to allocate these funds in the areas where they need it most at the individual level. Also housed within the State Education Fund, where the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account resides, is the Education Stabilization Account. The Education Stabilization Account is funded through 2 mechanisms. The first is unobligated balances from the pupil-centered funding plan account, residual funds left over from the pupil-centered funding plan account where the 4 tiers are housed. The second is through transfers from school district and fund balances when their projected budgets exceed when the savings is projected to exceed 16.6% of their budgets. When the combined 2 sources of revenues for the education stabilization account exceed 15% of the state education fund, the residual funds are transferred and form an alternative mechanism to supplement additional revenues through the pupil-centered funding plan account. As we were just mentioning, there are 4 tiers of funding identified in the pupil-centered funding plan. The first is auxiliary services, which includes transportation and food services, the local special education general fund transfers for each school district that assists in meeting local maintenance of effort. There is state special education funding that is provided to school districts and charter schools, but that is not administered through the pupil-centered funding account. Pupil-centered funding plan account due to the federal maintenance of effort requirements. The third tier of funding provides base funding for school districts and charter schools, or LEAs, and provides for all students a base level of education. The base level of funding is adjusted through different factors to account for each county's unique makeup. And lastly, the base funding is supplemented with weighted funding for specific categories of students to meet their individual educational needs. Each tier in this formula is additive, and all 4 tiers are combined to determine a total amount of funding for each LEA. As I was mentioning, with the first tier of funding, the model provides funding for food services and transportation. Both of these allocations are based on a 4-year average of the prior base year expenditures, as reported in the annual financial reports that we collect from LEAs. Currently, inflation is not funded in either year of the biennium, and this funding is specifically identified for school districts. Moving to the second tier, as I mentioned, local special education funding is representative of the transfer each LEA makes to fund its special education services. And due to federal requirements for maintenance of effort, we do not include an inflation adjustment so that we do not jeopardize the district's requirements in meeting those needs. Moving to the third tier of funding, we have the statewide base. And just like its namesake, it provides for a basic level of funding for each LEA. The statute provides for several options in calculating the statewide base each year of the biennium, and in principle, the statewide base is used from the prior year is adjusted by inflation and either an enrollment growth adjustment or revenue adjustment. As part of the governor's recommended budget this biennium, we utilized a revenue adjustment. You can equate this step in calculating the pupil-centered funding plan payments to the state's budget building process by utilizing base plus caseload and/or merit increases. These adjustments account for increased costs in maintaining service levels. The per pupil rate is then multiplied by projected students to be enrolled for the respective year to determine the total amount of base funding. Moving to the next step in calculating Tier 3, we have adjusted base, which if we are continuing the example of our state budgeting system, enhancements are applied to base, and in the case of pupil-centered funding plan, such as maintenance, these adjustments are attendance area based and the Nevada Cost of Education Index. Looking a little more specifically at the attendance area, this adjustment is an adjustment that is to account for increased costs of educating pupils in relatively lower population density areas. Generally speaking, within our state, our attendance areas are tied to population centers. And so if we were to look at Elko County for an example, there are 11 attendance areas total. These include Carlin, Elko, Independence, and Mountain Valley. Or if we look at Nye County, these would include areas such as Amargosa Valley, Beatty, and Duckwater. Moving to the second adjustment, we have the Nevada Cost of Education Index. also referred to as the NCEI, which is a different district-specific adjustment to account for local variations. This adjustment was established in NRS 387.1215, and by May of each even-numbered year, the department is required to review and determine whether revisions are necessary for the adjustment to remain relevant. The recommendations are presented to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education and for consideration by the governor. The NCEI adjustment specifically is made up of two components, a wage measure index using the comparative wage index and a cost of goods measure. These components were identified by subject matter experts who have worked with other states across the country to develop the index. The comparative wage index is not a cost of living measure, but it is instead it measures the cost of attracting staff to a region due to a variety of community factors such as location, outdoor activities, access to healthcare, entertainment, and so on. The CWI, Cost of Comparative Wage Index, uses regional differences in non-educators' wages and is based on the recognition that if within a given region, wages in comparable professions are higher than teacher wages will also have to be higher. The second component, the cost of goods measures, is a non-wage portion of the NCEI and is calculated based on the Bureau of Economic Analysis regional price parities, or RPP, component of goods to represent the regional cost differences in school districts associated with purchasing goods. When our subject matter experts in the past had contemplated housing as part of this adjustment, it identified additional costs that were then pushed to the more affluent neighborhoods, and so therefore it was recommended not to include this adjustment as it disproportionately allocated the funds. So due to continued challenges in identifying the data that best represents this index, numerous conversations have been had regarding this adjustment with the Commission on School Funding. Earlier this week, I had presented on this slide, and I did end up with a Freudian slip, and I mentioned that the Commission on School Funding had made a recommendation when I intended to say that in alignment with the methodology adopted by the legislature, the governor also adopted and maintained the recommendation for utilizing a floor of 1.0 in the model for those who receive a negative adjustment. So the recommendation that was put forward by the governor is in alignment with what we have been implementing this biennium, which is the floor of 1.0 for those who were below, which we have 5 districts who were less than 1, and 1 district who was just slightly above that number of 1, which was 1.008 for the district above. Taking a step back again a little bit more there, the Commission on School Funding since 2019 had received a total of 14 presentations and had numerous discussions on this adjustment. Most of those conversations did revolve around the best data source for this and not necessarily the methodology for calculating the index. And as you can see from this slide, we met several times, and most recently in September, the Commission had made a recommendation to eliminate the adjustment and allow the funds to flow through the model. But as you can see, that was after the agency's recommended budget was due to be submitted, and so was not part of our recommendation. In alignment with other budgetary practices, it's important to know that the NCEI adjustment is recommended to be updated biannually with additional and new information in order to keep it relevant. As I mentioned, we do this with the other adjustments in the formula as well, including enrollment and auxiliary services, just as an example. And all of that to say that the NCEI then obviously would change every time we update that, and so those who are below or above could change in relation to that. Moving to our 4th tier of funding in the pupil-centered funding plan, these are similar to the enhancements that we add on in our budget practices. Specifically within the pupil-centered funding plan, we have 3 tiers or 3 categories of students that we've identified supplemental funding for, which include English learners, gifted and talented students, and students who have been identified to be at risk of not graduating with their cohort. This is a new definition for identifying students who are at risk, and this was in alignment with the adoption that the State Board of Education recommended on November 12th of 2020. Currently, we do have a temporary regulation in place to support this definition. The supplemental funding that is identified for these categories of students is applied based as a multiplier or weight of the statewide base. The current weights are 0.50 for English learners, 0.30 for at-risk, and 0.12 for gifted and talented students. Taking a closer look at the at-risk definition, the components that are used to determine if a student is at risk of not graduating with their cohort have 75 different factors that are identified on this slide. There are 5 key areas that are contemplated, including academic proficiency, attendance, behavior, home and enrollment stability, and other, which includes school type, zip code, and other statuses. Because there are 75 different categories identified, not one is weighted so highly that it alone will move a student significantly along that indicator. And since we do get a lot of questions about the differences in the number of students and the funding, we do have a slide here that helps kind of provide some framework there. For example, prior to the pupil-centered funding plan, we had additional categorical funding identified for the new Nevada plan as well as Victory students. And you can see we had 58,000 and approximately 21,000 students identified there. When we used the free and reduced price lunch students eligibility counts, we ended up with 273 students identified to receive services. When we use the at-risk definition based on those students who are identified not to or at risk of not graduating with their cohort, the number comes back in alignment more with what we were previously serving under the other 2 categories. As a point of reference, for those students, there is a threshold of the 20th percentile in the lowest performing. Those are the students that are identified as at risk of not graduating. Moving into the implementation phase of the pupil-centered funding plan, previously under the Nevada plan, the department was responsible for administrating approximately $1.8 billion a year. Under the pupil-centered funding plan, we now distribute $4.8 billion a year. I'm sorry, we received $4.8 billion of revenue and distributed $4.3 million. And you can see on this slide that we did have approximately $500,000 that's identified to be transferred to the education stabilization account. As a point of reference, that is approximately 1.5 times of what our monthly distribution is at $360,000. We also had 4 districts within fiscal year 22 that met the threshold for transferring end fund balances that exceeded 16.6%, and that totaled $4.6 million. To Senator Buck's question earlier, the pupil-centered funding plan did also include a hold harmless provision for school districts who may have experienced a decrease in funding due to the transition. During the last session, there was a change made by the legislature which moved districts to be funded based on a per pupil amount instead of the total funding amount, and that is multiplied by their enrollment. And so there is a difference in calculation there which could contribute to potential decreases as well. With the governor's recommended budget, we moved from 9 school districts that were funded through the baseline amounts to 3. Those are Story, Eureka, and Esmeralda. Charter schools currently are also funded through the pupil-centered funding plan and were identified in aggregate, not individually. Moving to the administrative implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan, the department has worked throughout the last 4 years with stakeholders to develop business rules, including information, and these documents provided clarity on how the chart of accounts are used, how to calculate end fund balances, the administrative cap, and so on. We also were working on aligning reporting dates. We have SB 9 that is being put forward that requests to move the October 1 reporting date for a report of expenditures and services to January 1st. So that way the information is audited when it is reported. We also developed a new payment book when we had 2 years to develop the model. We had 30 days to identify and create the model to push the dollars out. So it was quite a monumental lift for our department, and we did make it. We also adopted 2 regulations in regard to the administrative cap and adjustment area calculation. And as I mentioned, we do have a temporary regulation pending regarding the at-risk definition. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we are happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the committee? Senator Buck.
Back on the, thank you, Chair Lang. Back on the special education funding, so how is that calculated? Is it in 2 silos and calculated every 4 years? Because what we're seeing is charter school special ed populations are growing and districts are shrinking. And so I'm just wondering, because according to my calculations and looking at it, it's about $1,000 per student difference. So I just wondered if you could address that.
Megan Peterson, for the record, could you please clarify for me first where you're seeing the $1,000 difference?
The difference between special education students going to a charter school as opposed to going to a district school, traditional public school.
Megan Peterson, for the record. I'll speak first to the methodology that we use to determine the state special education, which because of the maintenance of effort requirement that we have with the federal government, we have essentially a baseline funding amount that we maintain, to which we then apply inflation type adjustments to account for increased costs. Those numbers were not reflected or accounted for within this presentation because of that requirement. That calculation is done biannually with the creation of each biennium's budget and adjusted accordingly for each year of the biennium. For actual implementation, we do update the accounts that are used to distribute the money to each school district and charter school once we receive the validation day counts that are provided October 1st. And so we do recalculate that every year at the biennium to redistribute accordingly. But within that, we do also attempt to maintain the maintenance of effort requirement for each school district, so that way we're not also then reducing their funding.
Thank you.
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've always been super curious about what is the actual definition of maintenance of effort, because it's vague to me. And answer that first, and then I have another question.
Megan Peterson, for the record. I think the best analogy is that the maintenance of effort requirement is to maintain a similar level of funding as the prior year. We take that to mean that we have to spend at least as much, and so no less. The difference for each school district and charter school is that they have flexibility to meet it on a per pupil requirement rather than an aggregated requirement. The state, to our best ability, we try to maintain it at an aggregate level, but also still as much as possible maintaining it when we distribute at the district and the charter school level.
Okay, so now I have my follow-up question. So knowing the at-risk weights, and I don't know if you guys are, contemplating the change that the governor has decided would be the new definition of what then would be considered. How then do you calculate maintenance of effort when we're going to be looking at academic history per se? Or maybe that's what I want you to look at, because I know, and I said I wanted historical academic performance, I believe, but there was a key change in at-risk.
Megan Peterson, for the record. Currently, the only category of students where we observe and are required to maintain a maintenance of effort is special education, as required by the federal government.
Quick follow-up? And so, and there's nothing additional under ESSA that makes you contemplate some other factors?
Megan Peterson for the record. When it comes to students who are identified as at risk, because those students can experience different changes and may not be at risk of graduating in the future because additional services were provided and brought them in alignment with their cohort, we have not contemplated a maintenance of effort requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate you being here today. I will now open the hearing on Senate Bill 46. If the people that are here to present would make their way to the dais, introduce yourselves, and we can begin. Do you need some help? Just one sec, we'll help you. Are we on a hold till you get some technical help? Okay, so let's just take a brief recess. That's okay. Would you mind if we moved to the other bill hearing? And then we took, okay, in the interest of time? So with that, I would call, open the hearing, temporary close the hearing on 46 and open the hearing on Senate Bill 56. So if those presenters would please come to the front and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you.
I have to call the committee back to order, sorry. Important thing there.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. For the record, Dylan Shaver with Pinion Public Affairs on behalf of the Washoe County School District. With me today to present your bill, Senate Bill 56, is Dr. Sengdao Keo. Dr. Keo we were lucky enough at WCSD to have her join us. Previously, she served as the Chief Strategy Officer for the Nevada Department of Education and now serves as the Deputy Superintendent for the school district. As this pops up, there we are, thank you so much. Very briefly, we have been discussing this bill a lot, and I think the best metaphor I can present it to you with is my very first car, which was a 1991 Chevy Corsica. Wasn't in great shape, but it was mine. Over the years, it would have a lot of problems, and I would get those problems repaired. Add a new manifold here, a heat shield there, a new transmission there. And at the end, it had so many new parts that you couldn't really tell if it was the old car or if it was a brand new car consistent of just, recycled parts. The NRS, as it relates to education in this state, has gone through something similar. Title 34 has 26 different chapters of NRS, and individually, you and your colleagues, as well as the districts across the state, parents, groups, educational advocates, whomever, will bring amendments to those chapters time after time, and they may all be great ideas. But Senate Bill 56 asks the question, should we review all of these changes together and take a look at Nevada's educational statutes as a whole to make sure they continue to do the things that we intend for them to do, even after we have added the new parts by way of amendment after amendment? Now, all of those amendments may have been fantastic, but the question remains is, in the 21st century, are we left with a statutory and regulatory scheme that is best serving the students of the state of Nevada? And that's the question we are hoping to answer with Senate Bill 56 and the commission it creates. To talk specifically about it and to test my lack of technological acumen, we have Dr. Sengdao Keo, and we will start from beginning, and nothing happens. Okay, there it is.
Good afternoon, Chair Lang and honorable members of the committee. Dr. Sengdao Yang Keo for the record. I am the Deputy Superintendent for Washoe County School District and a parent of 2 young children in the pre-K through 12 education system in Nevada, as well as a product of the Nevada public school education K through 12. In terms of the summary for the Senate Bill number 56, really this is to create a commission on school modernization, establishing the membership, requiring the commission to conduct a study, really to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the education system, authorizing the commission to contract out for services if needed, and then authorizing the commission to establish working groups so that we can actually do the hard work that Mr. Shaver has just spoken about, and then authorizing the commission to request the drafting of not more than one legislative measure in 2025. Sorry, thank you. In terms of the need and the rationale for this, really, over the past several decades, Nevada has made significant investments in the education system that's resulted in several statutes, regulations, small policies, little p, that district schools and the state have to implement. And while these have been strategic and well-intentioned, they've often been in isolation of each other. And so really, at the heart of this bill is for us to look at the education system in Nevada strategically and intentionally and examine it as one large education system that is really complex. What we're asking for is essentially a comprehensive assessment. Some call this a review, others might call this an audit, but it's really an opportunity for us to identify the gaps that exist within the education system, as well as opportunities for us to improve, to continuously improve moving forward. And it also gives us an opportunity to examine our different roles and the different responsibilities that we have, regardless of where we're situated in that education system. And so we are looking to increase coherence within the education system. We are asking to examine work that has been burdensome and duplicative for schools and districts. Many of you have heard concerns from districts in the past that reporting requirements have been really duplicative, and oftentimes we are asked some of the same questions over and over again to fulfill different statutory requirements. In addition, you've also heard in the past of unfunded mandates, and that absolutely it negatively impacts our ability to do the important work that we're here to do, which is really serve our students and the communities. This is really an opportunity for us to leverage data, research, and evidence, and the learning lessons from the experts on the ground who are actually doing this work and can help us continuously improve moving forward. So really, this is an opportunity for us to strategically plan so that we can achieve our greatest aspirations. Now, the why is something that I think many of us will agree with, if not all of us, and that's really building an education system that is worthy of our Nevada students. We want to strategically plan in two new ways. One is examining what our current needs are, right? And typically in the education space, this is based on data, looking at our data, and then aligning this to the continuous improvement cycle. But the other way in which we want to strategically plan is planning for our aspirations. So it's not just being reactionary, but it's really being proactive and looking and examining a future education system that our students deserve, that we need as Nevadans. And we're really excited about that. Now, in terms of the intent of Senate Bill number 56, there are four primary tenets that I'm going to go through pretty quickly with you. One really focused on fostering innovation, creating system-level coherence and alignment. Again, leveraging evidence-based interventions so that we can really focus attention on driving outcomes, and then reducing burden and streamlining work. So I'll quickly talk through fostering innovation. This is really an opportunity to provide flexibility to schools and districts across the state and elevating the profession. We have professionals, experts on the ground doing this work. They know a lot about what it means now to implement these statutes and these regulations and the policies. And this is a moment for us to step back and really listen to the people on the ground, the experts on the ground, and reflect about an education system that is, again, worthy of the students that we serve. We do believe that this also is an opportunity to cultivate trust and respect for our educators, as well as our support professionals across the state. And it builds into an education system that is really, again, coherent and aligned. And so in terms of an education system that is coherent and aligned, it is critical for us to coordinate all of our different efforts so that we can maximize effectiveness and efficiency. It is an opportunity for us to build capacity across the state and really, again, spread the excellence and learning lessons from high-performing education systems. So to be very clear, the highest performing education systems in the nation and around the world do this exact type of thing. They pause. This is part of the continuous improvement cycle. They pause. They look at what's going on. They look at the data. They examine what's been happening. They look at the entire system, and then they envision and plan strategically for a future education system that their students, their families, and our communities deserve. That's what we're asking for. In terms of focus on outcomes, this is a picture of Mrs. Connie Hall. She's the 2023 Nevada Teacher of the Year, kindergarten teacher at Diedrichson Elementary School in Sparks. And this really is us saying that the folks working in schools, on the ground, in districts, they are doing the very best they can. We want to provide targeted supports so that we can remove barriers so that they can then do what's best for students. In terms of a focus on outcomes, really, we're asking the question, are we spending our money on what works to improve student and school outcomes? Are we using the latest research, evidence, and data to drive our decision-making? This is an opportunity for us to examine, again, the education system as a whole, and then leverage that opportunity so that we can really improve student and school outcomes in a way that is rapid and significant. The last I will say very briefly is this is an opportunity for us to reduce burden and streamline work across the state. We oftentimes listen to our teachers and school leaders across the district, and we often hear that there are a lot of requirements of them every day. So this is an opportunity for us to step back and prioritize their work in ways that honor their expertise and also streamlines the work so that they're not being asked to do duplicative things that are very burdensome. It is really our opportunity to redirect resources. And when I say resources, we really mean time, attention, financial resources to high leverage, high impact initiatives. So really, this Senate bill asking for a commission on school modernization and essentially a study with clear recommendations. This is so that all students are prepared for the future that they choose. We also believe that educators and support staff need to have the resources that we can provide in order to better serve the students and families and communities that we have. And one of the things that I will briefly share is what this could look like. We just heard a presentation on the funding formula, and an example could be with weighted funding, for example. The districts have an understanding around what we can spend those weights on, whereby only services and costs listed in SB 543, right, from the 2019 legislative session, can pay for specific services, specifically to English learners and at-risk students. And I will briefly just give an example. When I was at the Nevada Department of Education about 6 to 7 years ago, I actually was one of the individuals who helped write that language for Victory in Zoom. And in one of my previous roles at the Nevada Department of Education, I supervised and led the team providing services across the state for Zoom and Victory, SB 178, Read by Grade 3. And I'm sharing all this because here's an example of the misalignment. When we were doing that work, we were smart, very well-intentioned people. We were trying to be very, very strategic, and we didn't realize, because we didn't know, what that language then would become. And now it's been entered into, through the 2019 legislative session. It is now essentially what is eligible for districts and schools to spend. Now, I'm using that as an example because if our team had known several years ago that this language would essentially be copied and pasted into something else to serve these students, I do actually think we would have stepped back and said, wait, let's pause. We've got a plan for the future. We were designing for these specific programs, but now that this is being implemented across the state for other purposes, similar purposes, yet different, we probably would have taken a different strategy. So I will just briefly end by saying this is an opportunity to co-create an education system that is worthy of our students, an education system that prepares them for any future they choose. Dr. Enfield often talks about Washoe County School District being a district on the rise, and we are. But this state is a state on the rise, and we absolutely need to act in a way that is intentional, that is strategic, that helps to co-create and co-design and plan for a really smart, strategic education system. Thank you very much, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you for that presentation. I'll call on Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You made some really good points. However, I have a question I have a broad question because the bill on page 3, where it lists the criteria of what could be the following topics that are considered without limitation, which is, well, there's really only one section, so it would be sub 10. I guess what I'm trying to figure out in this modernization conversation, right? We're throwing this word around, but how is it exactly that we're going to examine the past, right? Because one thing that the prior hearing that we had the other day made me go do was go look, right? Blue Ribbon Task Force, Nevada Promise, Race to the Top, all of the things that we've done in the statewide. And what I found so interesting were that a lot of the benchmarks and the questions and the things that we were asking the state to do, they're still on the list. So why are we believing that we're modernizing versus taking a look at, I guess, goals that we never met, and then saying, what was the failed strategy that didn't meet the goal that is still relevant and real in 2023, even though we might have made the goal in 2011 or 2009?
Sangdao Yang Kyo for the record. That is actually an excellent point because that's exactly what this type of study would be doing. When we do an assessment, when we're talking about looking at the gaps and the opportunities, that really is part of the examination. It is looking at what we've done across many different areas. And to your point, these areas without limitation is why that language was really important, because these are some of the key areas that school superintendents had identified and ones that Washoe County School District can stand behind. And to your point, we think it is very important for us to examine what gaps and what that could look like is, here's the data. What didn't we do well on? How can we improve? What does research, evidence, and data from not just inside the state, but across the nation and around the world, what does it point to for how we can, again, significantly and rapidly improve student outcomes? And it's not just academic. It would also include behavioral and mental health supports. It would be something that is comprehensive, but that's what we're aiming to do. We are aiming to look at the system as a whole. It is partly examining the past practices, looking at the current practices, and envisioning what the future would look like.
We'll follow up.
Yes, Chair Lang.
I know you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Wonderful comment, right? I can't, because here's my thing, right? And I think it's almost like education is this space where we can't see the forest for the trees. And I think I used this example probably way back in 2011. It's like the Greek Sisyphus. We keep rolling this boulder up a hill for it to come right back down. But what worries me is that you're going to pay someone, right, a consultant, and I'm wondering, how are you going to use the world is not Nevada. And I understand that we did this with reorganization, right? We brought in all these studies. We brought in a guy from Canada, and he told us about what other school districts were doing well, what they were doing poorly, and then we said, oh, let's point the finger and let's do this set of ideas. When are we just going to just look at ourselves and look at our own data, look at the framework that has already been established? Like, so NDE already put out a framework, I think it's 224 pages of just benchmarks and frameworks to consider education. When are we just going to do that work, right? Look at everything that we have done already and really think through that. Because I feel like we pay, and I believe that you're innovative, and I believe that, you're coming in and it's just like, wow, this fresh air and she's wonderful. But I want to prevent Sisyphus, right? Stop paying someone to tell you what we already know to do, and you just need to take the time and look at everything that we've done holistically. And that's really paying yourselves to get in a room, hash it out, say where we've been, look at the data that we know already exists for ourselves, because it exists all across the state, and then just sit down and say, all right, this is clearly one of the long-term issues that are part of our problem, which I can guarantee you is always going to pop up like the same characteristics, because that's what I'm seeing. From 2007 to now, I am seeing the same characteristics pop up as issues. And that's what worries me about paying for another study and then saying it's a modernization. And I'm not attacking you personally. I don't know you. But if I knew you, but I'm saying this, and then I'm going to leave this alone and then let someone else ask a question.
Madam Chair, if I may. That was actually...
Please identify yourself.
Yes, again, Dylan Shaver, Opinion Public Affairs on behalf of the Washoe County School District. Senator Neal, you provided actually a far more succinct summary of what the bill does than I did. And in fact, we are seeking to do precisely what you describe. If you look at that same section, Section 10, what we are looking at is specifically those underpinnings, what we have been doing, which is the Nevada Revised Statutes and the Nevada Administrative Code. We're not looking for sort of recommendations from sort of the outside world. We'd want to do exactly what you're describing, even to the point where you say, get all of our people into the room. Well, that would be the commission itself. And honestly, I don't think I can hire you from here, but next time maybe I can speak to you in advance and allow you to do this for us, because that's precisely what we're looking at. And I believe that the superintendent and the district share that same frustration. I think you've seen... you have been through so many legislative sessions, and we have seen over that period of time, I think 5 superintendents in Washoe County, 3 or 4 in Clark County, a handful of state superintendents of public instruction, 3 or 4 governors, and you are correct. There is always a new outside expert to tell us how they're doing it in Ottawa, but the beginning of this conversation is precisely what you described. We're going to look at Nevada's laws, Nevada's code, and see how that can all be streamlined and work together to achieve then those other goals that you described, whether it's from Nevada Promise, Nevada Ready, or one of the other of the alphabet soup worth of presentations and reports that are sitting on probably shelves from your previous legislative office yet to be unpacked.
Thank you. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for what you're trying to do. But I'm going to kind of use Senator Neal's approach a little bit of having sat, not necessarily in the Education Committee, but through many sessions where we're looking at different formulas and funding, et cetera. And now we're asking for another commission. Nevada currently has, under the website, for the governor's website, we have 250 boards and commissions. 250 boards and commissions. We are seeing bills because they can't fill some of these commissions, and I'm worried that if we have the data already, isn't it, in my mind anyway, the job of our state superintendent's office to be that umbrella for the 17 other different superintendents and kind of put all of the information that we already have? Shouldn't this be being done already under the state superintendent's office? All the information that you're trying to gather, all the information that you say, Mr. Shaver, that we already have, isn't that already the repository of where this information should have been going? And then shouldn't the state superintendents then be going to the county superintendents go to our state superintendent and say, hey, what does this information look like, as opposed to yet another commission? And then I have a follow-up after that.
We're going to split back our response. Thank you, Senator Dylan Shaver. For the record, again, on behalf of the Washoe County School District, is the state superintendent still sitting behind me? It may or may not infect my, okay. You make an excellent point, Senator. There are an infinite number of commissions, and when it comes just to education ones, there are just so many. The critical piece is the review, and we are here today to say the Washoe County School District, and I believe the other superintendents across the state, are prepared to conduct the review, but what we need is your buy-in. Right, like Senator Neal said, get together in a room and pay yourselves and use the time that you have and the resources you have to do it. Senator Neal is not incorrect in that. Senator Titus is not incorrect about sort of the commissioning of this state. But at the end of the day, what is required is sort of your authorization and you as leaders in this state, of the people who actually have the ability to push a green or a red button on the things we propose when we come back with that information. And knowing that sort of this review is conducted sort of with your blessing. It doesn't need to be a commission. It doesn't, need to be a hired outside expert so much as it needs to be something that you have blessed, so that when we come back, that the work can be validated or not, but be part of a meaningful conversation. As far as what NDE should or should not be doing, with Superintendent Ebert sitting behind me, I will of course turn the microphone over to Dr. Sangdao Yankio, former Chief Strategy Officer for said department.
Sangdao Yankio for the record. The Nevada Department of Education plays a really important role, and I believe that they are a partner in this work. I also think it's really important for districts to have an equal seat at the table, really, so that we can hear from the folks who are providing supports directly to the schools, and also leveraging that opportunity. And what Mr. Shaver has just said is absolutely true. The districts are already not just interested in moving this forward, we plan on moving this forward. We absolutely want your buy-in, we want your support. And part of that is because we absolutely believe that this is an opportunity for us to engage in the continuous improvement process in a really strategic way. What I will say is, as somebody who has been in that system at the state level and at the district level, my experiences with that is that we are implementing so many said statutes and regulations and policies. It is incredibly challenging to do. And even the very best and brightest, and they are amongst us right behind me, and in our schools and in our districts and at the state level, it can feel absolutely overwhelming. One thing that I will say is what it looks like and feels like is a lot of piecemealed, really smart ideas that are well-intentioned by really smart people. And it is absolutely overwhelming to implement all of these kind of hundreds of wonderful ideas while still trying to make sure that students have the very best service that we can provide to them. And so this is us pausing, taking a breath, and saying, let's really look at how all of these different pieces fit in with each other and make sure that they're aligned and make sure that this is a coherent education system. That's what we're aiming to do. That's what we're hoping to do. And that's why that actually looks different from the other commissions. Now, I've seen the other commissions, and actually on the state side have supported some of these other commissions. And so what I will say is there are a lot of charges out there, and what we're hoping to do is saying, do all of these different charges actually make sense when they all come together? And one example that I will use is, without going into specifics, but I'm sure schools and districts, and I'm sure NDE can provide examples of this too, but there are statutes that people will discover and say, oops, this was a statute 12 years ago that we haven't been implementing. We just found that out, so we need to do that. And this is real. This absolutely happens across the state. And so when you start thinking about just the number of requirements, complex requirements that schools and districts and the state have to enact, this is our opportunity to really look at it strategically. That's what we're aiming to do.
Just a quick follow-up, Madam Chair. First, I don't see anything in statute that prohibits, I represent 6 different school districts, so 6 different superintendents. I know you have a statewide association of school superintendents, and I see nothing in current law that prohibits you from getting together, as you do as school superintendents, for addressing these issues without a commission. That's just a statement. But then this is novel, I actually have a question regarding the bill itself and not the concept of the bill. So on number 9, again, it's one section, you go down to 9, I happen to sit on the Northern Nevada Behavioral Health Care Policy Board, and we've been struggling with how do you, and maybe our attorney needs to answer this, it says the commission may apply for any available grants and accept any gifts, grants, or donations to assist the commission in carrying out its duties pursuant to this section. Who would be the keeper of that? What budget account would you put that in? Who would monitor that? And I don't know if there's a state law, because we've been struggling with accepting grants for our board. And is that a standard that all commissions have that line item? And if so, where budgetary is it under?
Madam Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. In response to the Senator's question, it's not uncommon for commissions and other similar state agencies to have this language that allows them to accept gifts, grants, and donations. Many of those kinds of entities have a particular department or agency of the state government that's responsible for providing administrative services to the entity. And that department or agency of the state government would then be responsible for collecting that money, accounting for it, and all of those other duties. For this bill, for SB 56, instead, the commission itself, as you'll see in subsection 11 of section 1, is empowered to employ for or contract for the services of those kinds of personnel. So in this bill, as opposed to letting a state agency provide those administrative services, the commission would be required to do that itself.
Then that leads me, do you have the capacity to do that? Are you anticipating employing somebody to monitor these grants or apply for the grants? Is that also anticipated with this?
Dylan Shaver on behalf of the Washoe County School District. Again, thank you for the question. As Mr. Killian pointed out, most sort of bills of this nature authorize the committees to do that. Realistically, we anticipate that between Washoe County and the other school districts, this will be self-funded and we would sort of work it out interlocally. We did not sort of, there is no sort of grant in mind that we had sort of intended to pursue, but when LCB creates these sorts of things, that language ends up being sort of boilerplate across the board.
Thank you for that. Thank you, sir, for your legal ease, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Thank you. Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang. So what comes to mind for me is duplicative, in that as a district superintendent, you could put together a committee to do this. The DOE is also there as the state superintendent with many of these categories. Also, as my colleague said, there's 250 different boards and commissions. Have you looked at those and if there's a way that this could fit into one of those? And then also the State Superintendents Association. So I just wondered why you need a law for this. Why not just, good leaders just do it? I mean, I don't know.
Again, Dylan Shaver on behalf of the Washoe County School District. Thank you, Senator, for the question. As we said previously, my belief is that the client intends to. What we are here for is your blessing. There are, as you know, in fact, as you all know better than anyone else in this building right now, no matter how well-intentioned you are, no matter how smart you are, there are 168 hours in a week. And before we go to the other superintendents and start committing some of that time for an undertaking of this magnitude, I think that what we'd be looking for is buy-in from the legislature. The laws are approved only by you. The Nevada Administrative Code is proposed by the department and again approved by the Legislative Commission. And this is as you know, a tremendous amount of work. And we're not looking for a yes or no on the final product, but that the work is going to be conducted in the first place in a domain that is largely yours. It is a responsibility of ours to show up and say, this is a thing we would like to do, and this is how we would propose to do it, Senator.
If I may, sorry, Sangdao Yang Kyo for the record. Thank you for that question, Senator. Washoe County School District has already started internally doing this work, and we already plan on working in collaboration with other districts. What I am hearing from you right now, from multiple senators, is you can already do this work without us. And one of the things that Mr. Shaver and I did have a conversation about is how important it is for us to all work in collaboration with each other. One of the reasons why we did propose this bill in particular is to say, in preparation for 2025, so you are not caught off guard, we are letting you know that we believe that the Nevada education system has been piecemealed in very strategic ways, but all of these pieces don't actually fit together, and we've already started doing that legwork internally. So I want to be really clear about this. There is already a commitment from Washoe County School District. We already are committing resources and staff time because that's how important it is. We believe that there is misalignment. We believe that there are revisions that need to be made, and it makes it really hard and challenging to have legislative session once every 2 years, and the districts have to prioritize, kind of said number of priorities to bring forward. This really is an opportunity for us to work in collaboration with each other moving forward. That being said, we absolutely would appreciate support for this. We also recognize the push on whether or not this can be done without this actually moving forward in this bill.
Thank you. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the intent. I think probably all of us agree. And I think, and I don't want to force you to answer the same question because it's already been asked twice. But obviously my mind went in the same direction. The superintendents are already meeting monthly, and I guess we all just assumed that these conversations are ongoing already. And rather than putting you in a position of saying, no, they're not doing that, I can show you minutes, I can do this, I can do that, and calling people out because we're here to collaborate and work together, maybe we could just have a conversation offline that I'd just understanding how those meetings, and you may not be the correct individuals to even answer that question, but how long are those meetings? What's happening in those meetings already? Because obviously we're looking at the language and it says the commission consists of superintendents and or someone they decide to appoint. But then our minds immediately went to, well, they're already doing all that. They're already sitting down. They're already having these conversations. So I think that's why folk are asking that. But rather than put you in a weird situation where I want you to highlight and call out or do anything like that, I think just for me, for my own research, and then we obviously would want to share that with all the members, it's just like, well, let me walk you through what's happening in these conversations. Because I think because we're not in that room, we don't, we just assume a lot of this is just naturally occurring already, and that's why it feels repetitive. But if you could maybe help us in that way, see, here's what these monthly conversations look like. Here's why we think giving clear direction and instruction is necessary. I think that would be helpful to us. and it won't be in a way that we have to somehow have a public jury, right? I just want to, if you could provide some of that information to all the members, because I think that would be very helpful to us. And so it's, rather than a question, it's just an ask. Thank you.
Senator Donate. He's good. You did it. Okay. Any more questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll open it for public comment. I'll first take any person that would like to speak in favor of the bill. Please come to the dais, identify yourself, and you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dr. Mary Prusensky, and I am representing the Nevada Association of School Superintendents. And the Superintendents Association is in full support of this bill, and we want to thank Washoe County School District for bringing it forward. It formalizes and puts a little punch behind that, looking at statutes that need to be changed, and there will be several suggestions brought to the next legislative session, I'm sure. But it's not just you're appointed to a committee and meet when you can. When it comes with your blessing and it becomes part of NRS, it's powerful. And so I think that was the main reason for bringing this bill forward. If you look at the Invest presentation, or you've had the Invest presentation, and one of the tenets of it is to modernize our educational statutes. So we want to thank Washoe for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paige Barnes with the Ferrado Company, here today on behalf of the Nevada Association of School Boards. We are here in support of SB 56 and stand ready to partner with Washoe County School District and the Nevada Association of Superintendents. Thank you.
Thank you. BPS, is there anyone on the phone?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of Senate Bill 56, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone in Las Vegas? Seeing none, is there anyone that would like to speak against the bill? And in BPS, I'm assuming you said there was no one on the phone, so there's no one on the phone to speak against either?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one caller on the phone. However, I don't know if they wish to testify in opposition or not. Caller, if you'd like to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 56, please press star 9 on your phone. It does not look like the caller wishes to testify in opposition.
Thank you. I'll take testimony in neutral. BPS, did they want to speak in neutral?
To testify in neutral on Senate Bill 56, please press star 9. Go ahead, caller.
Good afternoon, Chris. Yep. Good afternoon, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. While we have not taken a position yet for or against SB 56 on a read through the language of the bill, we just want to point out that in Section 10, which lists the possible topics of study for this new commission, subsection F lists teacher and support staff pipeline. We would just, in the friendliest possible way, like to ask if this moves forward for educator retention also to be considered. Obviously, educator vacancies is one of the top, if not the top, issue of crisis proportions in schools across the state right now. While the pipeline pipeline is very important. We believe retention is equally, if not more important. And if this commission moves forward, that should be included. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more speakers in neutral, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 56 and thank our presenters for being here today and open the bill on Senate Bill 46. Sir, if you just go ahead and start, it'll come up.
My apologies. Unlike Mr. Guy Hobbs, I am truly a rookie at this, so he is a wonderful, wonderful man. My name is Andrew Fueling. I serve as the superintendent of the Carson City School District. I am also a member of the Commission on School Funding. If you have heard, I'm better known as AJ in education circles. So that may be something you've heard of. But today I'm here. I apologize. I'll likely hire Washoe County School District to do my presentation slides next time. They're much fancier and nicer than mine. But to introduce an idea, something that I was introduced to a number of years ago, have thought about for quite some time and bring to you for consideration today. The basic idea is oftentimes, and I think this happens in any industry, but in education as well, this idea that we come across certain problems or certain opportunities and we wish we could do this, and that doesn't always, it's not always possible. So the idea, some way to provide flexibility within time requirements, resource requirements for our school districts here in Nevada. I will say as well, as we go through this, I'm certainly open to suggestions or guardrails that may need to be attached to this. Just not really ego with this, just trying to help utilize resources to provide some of the best outcomes for our kids. So a quote, I had to find a quote that somewhat aligned with what I was talking about. So I found one from someone I have no idea who he is. But allow for many paths for your goal. Do not fixate on one path because you are likely to give up when that path is blocked. And I feel that kind of simply lays out this idea. And this doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes you just have those ideas, different ways that you would like to attack certain problems. And the idea that sometimes you can't do that. There sometimes are roadblocks to what we are trying to achieve. And so just trying to have a bit of an analogy here, I think of humans as we are, as far as I know. Imagine a world where with common aims, individual humans can determine their own path to meet their definition of success. You can think of your own resources, your own constraints, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and I feel like that is the world we live in. And think of that in terms of school districts and imagining a world where with common aims, individual school districts can determine their own path to meet the state's / their definition of student success. And clearly there's a lot of overlap there, but we also have a lot of local initiatives, local values that are represented in what we try to do. But again, taking into account all those things, the resources, constraints, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats we have. And I will say that we do move towards that, but it's not exactly available in every way to us. And so this idea for the bill is not original in any way. I heard about this Districts of Innovation program in Texas probably back in 2017, and I've just always kind of kept that in my mind. And so the Districts of Innovation, and I took this quote out of the San Antonio Independent School District, their local innovation plan. This designation allows districts freedom from state-level regulations to deliver instructional and support services in novel ways that improve student educational outcomes. The bill provides districts with opportunities similar to those previously enjoyed by charter schools and prompts districts to determine how exactly to best utilize the designation to better serve students. I don't know a lot about the Texas education system. I think there may be some more differences between the charters and public schools there, so I think that's probably where that note comes from. I don't know if it's as significant in Nevada. So Texas has 1,026 school districts. In the first year it was implemented, 8 districts attempted to do this, which is 0.7%. Now, if you go to the T website, Texas Education Association, or Texas Education Agency, sorry, there are 925 that currently have innovation plans that are listed. So 90% of the districts in Texas take advantage of this opportunity, again, to I guess, try to exert a little bit of control and take advantage of some flexibility potentially that they think would be valuable to serving their families and kids. And the way it works is actually fairly simple, surprisingly, in some ways. So your Board of Trustees would have a resolution to consider, and then that there's kind of instruction then to develop a plan. The board appoints a committee. They write a plan, and there's some definition. Like it's considered to be more of a community. You're bringing in a lot of stakeholders to develop this. This plan is written. If there are any laws to be considered that the district would want to be exempted from, that it feels would inhibit the plan, it can write that in. And if the board then takes that plan and has a 2/3 majority vote, that's it. There's no other level beyond that. So if the board has that level of approval, it exempts the district from any laws that it feels like would get in way of that innovation plan. Now, I sent this as my initial draft kind of letter of intent to Mr. Killian, and I appreciate his support with this. My legal team is all right here, sitting next to me, so it was all the help was greatly appreciated. And I thought this was really novel, and I thought this would really just be different and something really new for Nevada. And then he came back to me and noted that, well, you might want to take a look at this. And so there is currently on the books in Nevada. This is not an original idea in Nevada in any way. I guess maybe Nevada actually led the way on this, and I just didn't know. So in 2007, Senate Bill 238 created what were called empowerment schools, which is codified in NRS 388G. And within that, the basis is at the school level. Schools should share in decision-making impacting them and have more autonomy as to what is happening and decisions being made in their schools. And along with that, there was, if a school individually would decide to go down this path of effectively creating a plan for allowing that autonomy and having more control over their schools, they would actually receive additional state per pupil funding at that time. There was also a process within that to exempt themselves from state law. And so that again is not new in any way to what is already existing in statute. If you read this, it is quite a process to go through. My understanding, and I found one document that at one point, the high point was there were 18 schools in 2010. Most of them were in Clark County. I believe Whittle High School in Douglas County may have done it. But I don't have a lot of great information on it, other than it was it was being taken advantage of. And then, of course, you have the Great Recession and everything kind of fell apart. That extra funding went away, and lots of really difficult decisions had to be made at the state and school district level. So since that point, there have been no others, and as far as I know, no one was really even aware of it anymore in talking with some of the other superintendents. So taking that bill, that language, and trying to simplify it, and I'll say I was very much looking at the Texas model, and simply allowing at the district level, instead of it being at the school level, to develop an empowerment plan, this idea of trying to bring innovative ideas to support students, and then also keeping in that piece of the potential exemption from state law if there's something that seems to be getting in the way of that idea. The general categories of items that could be considered when doing this, what this plan would be looking at is the entire program, educational and operational, of the school district, looking at different innovative curriculum or instructional methods, provisions regarding community participation, campus governance, and parental involvement, modifications to the school day or the school year, provisions regarding the budget of the school district and funding for the programs of the school district, accountability and assessment measures, and any other innovation determined to be appropriate by the superintendent of the school district, and then again requesting for a waiver from law that hinders implementation. The steps, revised steps, and again the old language was, it was a really, really long and difficult process to get there. But there was the incentive of more funding, which I completely believe in incentives, and that clearly led some districts or schools to try that out. But the way it's written in here, your local school board would direct the creation of the empowerment plan by either the superintendent or a design team. The local school board, there would be a designee that would either be a part of that group or otherwise is the one who is supposed to review that plan and come back to the board with a recommendation as to it being a yay or nay or needing approval. If approved, it would be good for up to 5 years. The board could later amend or revoke the plan. And it would have to happen kind of through the same process that it was originally brought on. So basically the board would have to go through that approval again. If it includes a waiver from law, it must be then approved by the state school board. So that's the ultimate, the difference between the Texas version and this is that in order to, if I remember, kind of to keep this the uniform system of schools piece of the Nevada Constitution, that's kind of something that needs to be there. So that would be another level of approval after the board approves it. If there is this waiver of law, you would have to go to the State Board of Education, and they would have to consider it and give approval to it. That plan would then need to be posted on the district's website, and then an annual report presented to that local school board and then submitted to the state annually as to how it's going. What are these pieces of implementation? What are you doing? What results are you seeing? And I guess deciding if this is something we still want to continue down, look to modify, or end. So one of the things I did want to point out, so I brought, just to quickly go through, and I apologize, are we doing okay on time? I'm sorry. So I assume there might be some kind of question about, well, Texas has been doing this since 2015. What are they doing? What's so different? How are they utilizing this opportunity? So I pulled a couple of these just to quickly read through some ideas. I have San Antonio First, just for the idea of a much larger school district, what that would look like, what they're looking at, and then some other smaller districts, but some of the highest performing districts, although rather affluent districts, I would say, based on what I've read. So San Antonio, within their plan, and I'm focusing on this exemption from law because I think clearly that's probably the biggest maybe concern or consideration that is running through your minds. So theirs starts off with addressing class sizes. So Texas has class size rules just like Nevada does in terms of ratios that can be that are allowable. Like Nevada, there's waivers that you can ask for if you are not meeting those class sizes, and so they are asking for a waiver, an entire waiver, so that they don't have to. So part of this too is maybe creating some efficiencies. So instead of having to, on an annual basis, continually ask for these waivers, they're saying research has shown that with additional needs such as English language learners, students in poverty, and those with IEPs, they tend to benefit the most from smaller class sizes. By reducing class sizes for these students, we would likely slightly increase class sizes for other students. The district believes this arrangement will benefit student achievement more than its current situation. So effectively saying, look, if I have more English learners in one class, maybe I reduce class sizes there, but the effect is it might increase sizes over here, it might go here, the ratio they're looking at is 22. They might go up to 24, but maybe that English learner class is 16, something along those lines. They look at the length of the instructional day. There's actually a requirement that it cannot be longer than a certain amount of time. And so they ask to try to meet that in a different manner than the 420 minutes of instruction each day or 7 hours each day. They asked to lengthen the school day. Student achievement has increased in schools with longer days and more common planning time. And this is something that, seeing some of the innovations that happen in charter schools in the state of Texas that the districts wanted to apply themselves. Along with that, then they had stipends tied to paying teachers more for extending those school days. And they also had in there that if this was going to happen at a school, so they weren't forcing it on all their schools, but if it were to be considered by the school, that 80% of the staff, they would have a vote amongst the staff, and 80% of the staff themselves would have to approve doing it. So they would have to approve having the longer day and approve then being paid for that time. And that's not so much law in that case, that's just more trying to be, I think, innovative. Class size is another one here. This is Eanes Independent School District. And really theirs is just saying, look, we're doing all this reporting on class size. These variances are given on a regular basis. Ultimately, we know that the quality of the teacher is the greatest impact, not class size, but we still will try to meet class size requirements because we don't want teachers to have really large workloads. Alternatives to educator certification. So in this case, when a certified educator is not found for a unique or innovative class, a campus principal may submit to the superintendent or request for a local certification, effectively taking the state out of the certification process, that they're allowing at the local level based on certain requirements that this district comes up with, that they could allow for some local certification to do that. Looking at the evaluation system. So they have a state evaluation system in Texas, and here the district is asking for the ability to create their own evaluation system better aligned with the Eanes ISD strategic goals and the student assessments that they used. So I won't take any more of your time going through that, and I apologize, but I just wanted at least to give some examples, I think, of somewhere where it's been happening for a while.
Thank you. We really appreciate your presentation. We do have a few questions, and we'll start with Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a question on Section 3 of the bill. And this really has to do with the, so there are portions where you're striking out the team. And I was not clear on why. And maybe these provisions relate to, some of it is kind of charter overlap, but in Section 3 in line 17, it says the superintendent of a school shall submit the empowerment plan to the designee of the board. And then it goes on in subsection 3 of Section 3, and then strikes out the principal, strikes out the team. And I guess what struck me as odd is it's my understanding that empowerment schools are participatory management, and that means that it is based on school decisions being made, not superintendent coming in and kind of being this overseer. The school has more control. That's what I understood empowerment schools to mean. And so I know that you looked at Texas, and Texas is a very unique school system. So can you help me understand why you're placing superintendent in roles where really it probably should remain the team for the participatory management style?
Sure. So, I think just an important distinction first is the way it's originally written. It was all about individual schools making these decisions, and the I don't want to say exactly the intent of this, but in following the Texas model, it really went more to the district itself, not individual schools. Although individual schools, they may support the district in trying to, are in being a part of the team to develop this, would come up with maybe some of the ideas. So one of the quirks with this, and again, this is not anything I'm held to, is so there's really two ways for it to begin, with the school board either saying, superintendent, create an empowerment team, get these people together and start talking about this, or it is superintendent, create this plan. And so I personally, I don't think I'm the smartest person in the room, so I would like getting many more stakeholders in that conversation rather than just me. I wouldn't really want that on me. But so the language kind of dances maybe a little awkwardly in places, trying to make sense between that you may have it going one way or you may have it going this other way. And that's certainly something that could be cleaned up, I think, to just have it as this empowerment team of stakeholders helping devise this plan.
Madam Chair, can I have a follow-up? Yes. So let me ask you this, and I understand that your presentation didn't start off the right way, and so you might be just discombobulated in general. And I think it's happened to us where we start off in a PowerPoint doesn't work and the hearing goes downhill. But you're okay, right? So let's just focus. So if you look at Section 3, subsection 2, lines 31 through 34, you strike out that whether or not considering the amount of money required to carry out the empowerment plan. And that was odd to me too, because how do you create the plan not knowing how much it's going to cost you? I don't think you have a magic bag of money. If you do in Carson City, let me know, because we need to be friends. However, you need to know how much it's going to cost you in order to implement something of this level within a school district, right? Because how many schools are in Carson City?
It's more than Clark County.
Yeah. And this, and my understanding is that this applies, it excludes Clark County and applies to all of the other counties.
So if I could clarify, I have not excluded anyone in the language. So the original language of this bill has So there's a lot that has been left out in this process from the original language of the bill. And my intent with this, as is the intent from what I see in Texas, it is available to anyone who would be interested in it. Now, as far as the budget piece, so that language, I think very specifically goes back to the original empowerment school language, which was a much more cumbersome process. And that was a part, you would have to develop this budget, and part of that was you were going to be receiving extra money. So what were you going to be doing with this money? There's no extra money attached with this. This is within the existing budget that a district has. This is something that, while I would agree it may end up costing money, to some money to do this, and a district may have to make that decision to reallocate resources, it doesn't necessarily mean that it does. It doesn't have to. So I don't know if that really helped or not.
I'm just gonna let this go. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Buck.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Chair Lang. So in 2008, I was principal of CT School. It was my second year, and we were named an empowerment school. And I believe that it was created to decentralize a bit and bring autonomy to the school level. So our school empowerment team, which consisted of students, member of the union, parent, a specialist, teachers, and so we're all a part of this board that created an instructional model or empowerment model, or basically a business plan for schools, how you do business day to day to day to day. And so it was the empowerment model, and we all had to agree to it. Sorry, excuse me. And so if we needed waivers, it was usually maybe for negotiated agreements. Our rule was that it had to be good for students, it had to be legal, and of course, it couldn't hurt another school or pull resources from another school. We had extra funding, and it was truly transformational at the school level. I was just curious, at the district level, you know, how do you get the buy-in from your individual schools, and maybe looking at making your individual schools more of where they have more autonomy and in what they're doing?
So I think the conversations, and so I'm newly superintendent as of July 1, but starting off the year, went around having listening sessions at all the schools, 29 in total amongst our 10 schools, and knowing our principals. I've been in the district for over 8 years, knowing the community because I live there and I have 3 kids in the school system. I think that I feel like there have been conversations, well, I should say, we have a very tight school district, and I don't think there, and maybe this is where you need guardrails, but I don't believe any of our principals in taking advantage of any of these opportunities would ever do anything to hurt any of the other schools. But it's something that when, you know, we are having conversations, and this was happening when I was only doing the finance side of things, but on the superintendent side as well. You'd have conversations where, you know, I wish we could do something like this and something like that. And I'm not saying that every one of those conversations would necessarily be inhibited by a current law, but that is something that certainly could come up, and this would at least offer that opportunity. And so it may seem strange given your experience within Clark and just the size of Clark County, but within, and really that experience, because I'm trying to navigate a little bit with what that is, but looking at it more from the district level in Texas. But ultimately, whatever it is we would come up with, even if the district would implement this, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single school would have to accommodate exactly what is being said. I think it's simply that there is an opportunity to do so. So in terms of having that local autonomy there, schools could very well have the ability to say, you know what, because this is what I want to do for my kids, this really makes sense. For some schools, it just may not. They might have some other initiative or some other model of leadership within their building where they just decide that this really isn't a fit for us.
Thank you. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question, and thank you for, you're new as in the superintendent role, but not new to the education process and recognizing that you're trying to do something to improve the schools. I have a couple questions specifically related to the bill. I'm wondering, I need clarification on, first, does Carson City currently have any schools that fall under the empowerment schools?
We do not.
Okay. So is there anything currently that would prohibit you from creating an empowerment school within Carson if you wanted to do such a program?
I don't believe so.
Please state your name.
Oh, I apologize. Sorry. Andrew Feeling, for the record, Superintendent, Carson City School District.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so help me understand why the need then to change the school to a district. So were you anticipating more than one school would do this and they'd be working together, collaborative, and within the school district? Or are you looking at forming whole new subsets of districts within the district?
Oh, no, not, sorry, Andrew Feeling, Superintendent, Carson City School District. No, not creating any type of subset within that. So, in large part, again, I'm referencing a very, very simplified process in Texas against this empowerment school language in Nevada that is not simple in any way. And I think because of maybe some of the language that has been left out from the current 388G, that process is not easy in any way. It is, there is a lot to that. And I think it says something that, so there are no empowerment schools in Nevada right now, right? And now there's no funds attached, so you don't have the same incentive, but no one is going through this process. I would argue part of that is going to be, some people don't know about it, but I think part of it, for those who do, there is so much to it, it's a little bit of a dissuades.
All right. And if I might follow up on that, Madam Chair. And so on the bill itself, if you look at Section 4, it deletes for me the accountability piece. The Board of Trustees of the school district shall conduct a financial audit of each empowerment school within the school district. That's being stricken. And so is there no accountability piece? And then I would follow up with saying, if there are no additional revenues conducted, would they just fall under the audit of all the rest of the schools? Could you help me with that?
Yes. So again, I think this balance of going between the empowerment schools and empowerment districts, so it just causes some confusion, and with the amount of strikeouts that are here. So effectively, because it's at the district level, the district is already getting audited, right? We have a financial audit every single year. I think if I understand this language, what was happening at the school level, because there was specified monies going over to them, they were running this program kind of as their own, if you think of it as their own carve-out business unit, and there is no requirement in law to otherwise have schools individually be audited. I think that language was there to make sure that the schools themselves would have an audit of what they were doing with their funds.
So for the overall picture then, I see, since there's no additional monies involved, to become an empowerment school, it gives you the opportunity not to follow the rules that the other schools districts have to follow?
Potentially, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you. And just for the record, that was Mr. Feeling.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Rookie.
That's okay. We'll take care of you.
Call you rookie fueling here. So.
I think our legal, Mr. Killian, has something to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Council. And yes, just in response to an earlier question about whether this would apply to Clark County School District or not. When the Empowerment School program was originally enacted back in 2007, it obviously applied to all schools statewide and all school districts. Subsequently, in 2017, the legislature enacted what became the reorganization of the Clark County School District, the provisions that relate to the organization of large school districts, which is a much more extensive and specific set of rules that govern Clark County School District in particular, and that effectively superseded the provisions of the Empowerment School subhead for Clark County School District in particular. And as amended by SB 46, similar provisions would apply. The new Empowerment District model also would be superseded by the much more extensive and specific provisions of the reorg that apply to CCSD. So this model would generally be available to the other 16 school districts in the state, but the reorg would still apply to CCSD.
Thank you. And if I could ask one last question, would this also grant a waiver from a collective bargaining agreement?
I hadn't thought about that, but that would not be the intent. I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
My legal team says no, but
We probably need to clarify that. Okay, so thank you for your presentation. I will take testimony in support.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dr. Mary Przinski, representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents. And I think the thrust of this bill is to provide a lot of local control and allow districts to make more decisions, local decisions on how to operate their schools and educate their children. It's a complicated process and as you can see outlined in the bill, there are lots of steps to go through, but it's certainly an interesting concept, and we support the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Again, my name is Paige Barnes with the Ferrado Company here today on behalf of the Nevada Association of School Boards. We are here in support of SB 46 and in support of our colleagues at the Carson City School District. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hank Brown, Carson Montessori Student Legislative Team, for the record. Good afternoon. We are in support of SB 46. What I'd like to start off with was how empowerment districts operate very similar to charter schools, and being an empowerment means we can be flexible to truly meet the needs of students. And you might note how my hair is not perfectly slicked back. That is because I was playing football just before I was here, so
We'll let it slide.
Thank you. That's my idea of true flexibility. Carson City Strategic Plan is very similar to Carson Montessori's. The Carson City School District is our sponsor, and our charter allows for flexibility and involvement and cooperation from families. And families have to be involved. Less reports, especially since so many are duplicates, helps free up educators to work with students and get their job done. More is not better when it comes to reports. So if we have to do less, then that's a good thing. CMCS is partnered with Africa, and there were some students on site, and they were dehorning rhinos. And on different occasions, some students helped build schools in Ecuador, and these students were not marked absent because of our flexibility, and we allowed them to use what we call a travel packet, which allows them not to be marked down as absent when they're on a learning opportunity field trip. And when we rewrote our charter, students helped write it. They had a voice in it, and they did the presentation of it. I was part of the presentation, and at the time I was in 2nd grade. And our principal is our student legislative team coach, and she's had a team for many years. She's sitting right back there in the blue. And Senator Hammond, you helped us with the neon bill, correct? So you must know how flexible Carson Montessori truly is. And I know this is a little off topic at the end, but I can't resist commenting on funding. A recent article from Anchorage, Alaska, their per pupil funding is over $20,000. And we'd love that for our school. We can spend the whole year in Africa on a field trip. And trust me, the data we would collect would be hands-on from us on-site observations.
Thank you so much for coming here today and for having the courage to come up and talk about why you think this is important.
Thank you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask right now.
Okay, is there any further comment in favor in Las Vegas? BPS, is there anyone on the line to speak in favor?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of Senate Bill 46, please press *9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Okay, is there anyone in opposition in Carson City? Anyone in opposition in Las Vegas? Anyone in opposition on the telephones?
To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 46, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. And we do have one caller.
Good afternoon, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, in opposition to SB 46. Just first want to say that NSCA and our local affiliates in Carson City have a great deal of admiration and respect for Superintendent Fueling and good relationships with the district. But I think on this bill, there may be unintended consequences that prove fatal. We think that when state government passes statutes, oftentimes there are very good statewide reasons and justifications for doing it, or all the time. There's good reasons and justifications for doing it, even if an individual district might find one of those requirements burdensome. We think this bill probably needs to be rethought. So that's our opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Any further testimony in opposition on the telephones?
Chair, the line is open and working. However, there are no additional callers at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone in neutral on the phone?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no additional callers at this time.
Thank you. Anyone in Las Vegas in neutral or in Carson City? Thank you. With that, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 46, and we'll move to public comment. Are there people in Carson City that would like to testify in general public comment? Anyone in Las Vegas? And I think the phones are empty, but I need to ask anyway. Anyone on the phones?
Thank you, Chair. To provide public comment, please press *9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. And we do have one caller.
Madam Chair, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. I will be very, very brief, but I did want to point to the Commission on School Funding's report today, and Mr. Hobbs, or Chair Hobbs' slide, in particular the fifth slide in his presentation, which looked at per pupil funding comparisons and side by side 2020 dollars and 2024 dollars with the governor's recommended budget. And if you do a little bit of subtraction in 2020, the difference between the per pupil funding that Nevada was doing in that year and optimal, as identified by APA, was $4,789. That's $4,789 shortfall in terms of optimal. Fast forward to 2024, and even with the historic appropriation that the governor has proposed into this year's budget, basically you see that we're largely would be running in place. The difference between GovRec for per pupil funding next fiscal year and the APA optimal funding, $4,693. So the progress made in terms of total dollars getting closer to optimal, less than $100 per pupil. So basically what this indicates is that largely we've seen big inflation numbers over the last few years. And so that the good news is that means more revenue into the budget. The bad news is that means the cost of operations go up. And so just want to point that out. I appreciate all of the work of the Commission on School Funding. Look forward to getting into this in more detail over in the Money Committees. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further callers?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working, and there are no additional callers at this time.
Thank you. And with that, I'll call the hearing for today closed, and we'll see you on Monday at 1 o'clock. Travel safe.